Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Alex Merriweather. On behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's program with Bruce Schneier, presenting his new book, Data and Goliath. Bruce Schneier holds a distinguished resume. He's a cryptographer, a world-renowned security and privacy expert, the CTO of Resilient Systems, a Harvard Berkman Center Fellow, a widely read blogger, and the best-selling author of 13 books, including Carry On and Liars and Outliers.
Data and Goliath is, as you said, my 13th book. It's sort of approximately my 13th book. It's often hard to keep track because how do you count books that are compilations of essays or second editions that are complete rewrites? So I'll say that I've written approximately a dozen books and leave it at that. This one is my book about surveillance. And I write about surveillance really from beginning to end, from who does it, why they do it, what's being done with the information, how surveillance works, technically and politically and economically. And then section 2 is why it matters, where I talk about basically why surveillance matters, why privacy matters, what's at stake here is the section. And section 3 is what to do about it, which has fewer tips for users than you might like. And I'll talk a bit about why. The book is Data and Goliath. I've heard people pronounce it Data and Goliath, in which case they don't get the joke, which surprises me. The title's actually an interesting story. I had several working titles, and between my editor and I, we came up with Data and Goliath. And I mean, it's a great title. I think it's just very, I think it's really visceral about what's going on, except Malcolm Gladwell just published a book called David and Goliath. Now, that would be okay, but my previous real book was called Liars and Outliers, which was published just after Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. And aping him twice felt like too much, like I'm stalking him. So I write this whole story on my blog about the title you'll never see and is so cool, and I get an email out of the blue from Malcolm Gladwell saying, you should use the title. And I said, well, I will if you'll blurb the book. And he said, okay, and I wrote back and said, you know they'll put your blurb on the front cover in a font bigger than my name. They put the blurb on the front cover. It's on the top. It's not in a font bigger than my name. So that's how that got there. And that's just a sort of bizarre story. So surveillance is a complicated issue. And it's complicated because a lot of it is happening simply because of what's going on in the technological world today. Right? Computers naturally produce data as a byproduct of operation. Right? So as soon as you turn on your phone, that phone is producing data. Here's where I am. Here's my phone number. Right? You make a call. Here's who I'm calling. Here's where they are. You receive a call. An IM message, you surf the web, you use an app. All of those things produce data. Right? Location data, data about your actions, data about who you're talking to, what you're doing. And that data is incredibly intimate. I mean, I write in the book that your cell phone is actually an intimate tracking device. I mean, if you think about it, it knows where you are at all times. Right? It knows where you live, where you work. It knows when you wake up and when you go to sleep, right? Because that's when you check your phone, first and last, right? You know, you've each got a phone, so it knows who you sleep with, right? But that's not why it exists. Right? If the government said, you know, you're required to carry a tracking device 24/7, we would all rebel. But we like carrying cell phones because of what it does for us. And it's the same with Google, same with, you know, imagine the police said, every time you make a new friend, you must alert the police, right? You don't, but you alert Facebook. And so we do these things. This kind of surveillance is ubiquitous. It's very hard to get away from, and we do it because of the benefits it brings us. I mean, I was speaking at Google this afternoon, talking about the benefits of Google Now. Because Google spies on your email, they're able to drop into Google Now automatically. Right, here's driving directions to where you're going. Your flight's delayed. Maybe you want to rebook a new one. Well, a lot of cool things happen because Google computers are watching your email, watching your activities. And this is very hard to get away from. In my solutions section, I could give solutions like, don't carry your cell phone, right? Don't have an email address. That's actually ridiculous advice. You can't be a fully functioning member of society without these things, without a credit card. And yet all these things track. And what we know is that government surveillance largely piggybacks on commercial surveillance. And it's not like the NSA woke up one morning and said, let's spy on everybody. They woke up one morning and said, oh wow, corporations spying on everybody. Let's get ourselves a copy. And that they do through a variety of means. Right? In other countries as well. China does a lot of their surveillance of their population based on what their population does on the internet, on their smartphones. Russia too, other countries. So there's a lot of this going on and a lot of crossbreeding between government and corporate surveillance. We learned one of the first Snowden revelations was that the NSA gets the phone record data of all Americans and uses that to sort of figure out conspiracies. That's incredibly intimate data. Meanwhile, we see corporations collecting data from governments, driver's license data, health data in the UK. Data that's government data flows into corporate databases. And things go back and forth. There's a lot of risk here. Certainly we see the security risk. And the security breaches happen and our data gets lost. So Anthem, the health insurer, gets breached, and it's like 100 million Americans, customers and non-customers, have their medical data exposed. And that's not something we asked. Or you're an employee of Sony Pictures and the North Korean government hacks you, and suddenly your personal emails are out on the internet. Now, if you remember that story, there was a lot of news reports on the executives insulting each other, insulting their movie stars, insulting the US president. That stuff made the news. What didn't make the news were the hundreds of thousands of regular employee emails. Right? The trials, the loves, the medical issues, everything people talked about in their email to their friends and colleagues suddenly exposed. That never makes the paper, but people peaked. And there's a real tragedy there. So I talk a lot about the ill effects of this data collection, what it means to be constantly under surveillance, because this is new for society. You look at totalitarian governments like East Germany, and put a lot of the population under surveillance, but what they did pales into comparison to what's happening naturally right now, simply because everything we do is mediated by computers. And you can't go through your day without thousands of computers helping you with your life, either ones that you own or ones that others own. And you can, in this bookstore, buy my book with cash and walk out without anybody knowing. You buy it on Amazon, and it's convenient, but there's a record of the purchase. There's also a record of the books you look at and choose not. There's a record of your browsing. And this stuff is saved. Right? We know Facebook saves everything. We found out about a year ago that Facebook saves posts you type, but delete rather than posting. Right? So here are things you decide, the things you're just doing. And this is Moore's law here. Right? The data storage drops to free, data processing drops to free, and it is cheaper now to save everything than to figure out what to save. And this is big data. And you might as well save it all because someday it might be useful. And there's no cost to saving it. Now we're learning now that there are more costs. There's costs in breaches. But there's real costs in liberties too. We know that a society under surveillance is a conformist society. If you're constantly being watched, you're less likely to do something out of the ordinary. Right? You don't want to stand out. Right? That's sort of the backwards of the I have nothing to hide argument. Right? If I'm being watched, I'm going to make sure I have nothing to hide. Because I can't hide anything, therefore I'm going to do nothing that's out of the ordinary. And fundamentally, I think that destroys social progress. That as a society, we improve by doing things that are outside the norm. and seeing that it's okay. Right? So for example, right now in the United States, I mean, it's amazing to say it, we're on the verge, probably the next 5 years, of two things: legalizing marijuana and legalizing gay marriage in every state. I mean, this would have been crazy for me to say 5 years ago. And seemingly within it just flipped. But that whole process leading up to the flip is a process of people doing things that are against the law. I mean, someone, about 40 years ago had to, try pot and say, that wasn't that bad. Right? Or have a, gay relationship and say, that was kind of fun, and look, no one got hurt. Right? And the process is slow. It takes generations, but eventually enough of us look around and say, that's not that bad. No one's getting hurt. What's the problem? But to get there, we needed people to be able to experiment and do the things that were technically illegal. Perfect enforcement prevents that process from happening. You would never get to a world where, pot is okay if you can't get through the world of it having not be okay, but people are doing it anyway. So there's a real risk in the perfect enforcement of the law you get from perfect surveillance. And I think it's very, very dangerous. So the third part of my book is titled What to Do About It, where I really talk about how we can move from this world of surveillance. And this is complicated. It's not as easy, and everybody wants this. What are the 10 things I can do? Right? The problem is that there aren't a lot of tips. Primarily because most of our data is under somebody else's control. It's owned by Google and by Facebook and by my cell phone company, and my credit card company, and my health insurer, and all the merchants I deal with. There's nothing I can do to secure that data because I don't have it. A lot of the data is what we're calling metadata, data needed to make the system work. So while I might be able to secure my email by encrypting it, I'm not able to secure who I'm sending it to and when I'm sending it and the size of the message, all the things that the network has to know. And most surveillance is based on that metadata, that incredibly intimate data about data. And we're living in an interesting world where technology can subvert the law and also the law can subvert technology, where each one can undermine the other. So for example, if you can, let's say, you encrypt your voice communication to thwart voice eavesdropping, whether it's by the phone company or a government. But the government can secretly, through law, undermine that encryption technology. And we know the US government has, the Chinese government has, many governments do. So it's sort of worse than our security is the security of the weaker of the two, our technological measures and our legal measures. And that makes this a very thorny problem. We know in the United States that the NSA has undermined security technologies. Right? In 2011, I believe, is the year, they forced, somehow, we're not sure, Microsoft to make a change in Skype to make that system more eavesdropping friendly. For a while we knew that something happened, we didn't know what it was. Now, based on a recent Snowden story in Spiegel, a German newspaper magazine, we know the details. And this is not unique. We believe this is happening in many systems. We believe the Chinese government subverts cryptography in systems they sell. Right? Huawei is a brand of network router. We believe is actually pretty much undermined by everybody. Right? So this makes it a very thorny problem. And so a lot of the solutions, I think, are legal more than technical. And that we need laws that deal with both corporate surveillance, at many levels. What can be collected, what can be stored, how it can be used, how it should be disposed. That this is something, like any consumer protection rules, we need regulations on what is good behavior in the corporate world. There's a bill that Obama's pushing right now. It's hard to know if that will do a lot of good, but people are starting to think along these lines. And similarly, we need laws regulating what governments can do. What is considered okay, again, for government surveillance against its own citizens without suspicion. What's allowed and what isn't. There's a lot of talk recently about something called Stingray. A Stingray is it's a code name for a fake cell phone tower. This is sold by a company called Harris Corporation, sold to police departments and the FBI, and used in criminal investigations, basically to intercept cell phone calls, to figure out who's where. The technology is very secret. The FBI doesn't like it talked about in court. They've actually instructed prosecutors to lie about it in court. And this is a technology that seems to be extraordinarily widely used by police departments around the country, to a lesser extent around the world. But and here's the odd story. Someone, I forget which magazine, did a technical survey of the DC area and found a whole bunch of Stingray devices or something similar that are all over DC, not run by the FBI, run by, we actually don't know who. My guess is some other government. Right? My first guess would be Russia, second guess would be China, and then Israel, France. You can go down your list. India, of who it might be. All right, so here's a sort of a fundamental problem. If I build a phone system that is vulnerable to something like Stingray, on the one hand, the FBI can use it to catch criminals. On the other hand, other governments can use it to spy on American diplomats and American citizens and everybody. This is my problem, surveillance versus security. This is a balancing act that the NSA has worked on for years, but now it's different. During the Cold War, this was easy. Right? The Soviet Union had their radios and their phones and their systems, and we can spy on theirs, and the US had its phones and radios and system. We can defend ours. Right? Attack theirs, defend ours. You could do both because they were different. Now they're the same. Everyone uses Microsoft Windows and TCP/IP and Cisco routers and PDF files, and we're all Firefox browsers. We're all using the same stuff. So when you build surveillance into your system to listen to the bad guys, you necessarily make the good guys vulnerable. If you secure your systems for the good guys, you necessarily secure the bad guys too. Right? It's one world, it's one network, it's one system, it's one choice. Do we want everyone to be vulnerable or everyone to be secure? This is hard. This is actually hard policy. Because we want to catch the bad guys. But we want to defend the good guys. But why can't we do both? And then we start throwing a temper tantrum and, serious policy talk ends. But right now, we're seeing those discussions. You see them when the FBI Director James Comey talks about the problems of encrypted iPhones. The problem of encrypted iPhones from his perspective is that when he gets the iPhone of a suspect who won't give up his password, he can't read the data. Now, from my perspective, that's not a problem. That's a good thing, right? Because that means all of us, if our phones get stolen, the criminals can't read the data. Hooray! Right? There's no magic system where the FBI can read it, but a criminal can't. Because I can't build a technological system that checks for the morality of the person reading the data. Right? I can check for, does he have the right secret number? But secret numbers get out. So a lot of what I'm advocating is that we move to security. That's security for everyone. That basically in our world, we build infrastructure even though the good guys and bad guys can use it. Right? We sell cars to you all even though bank robbers use them too. We sell cell phones to you all even though kidnappers use them too. Because the good uses of technology outweigh the bad uses. Right? Because society is fundamentally moral and good, and most of us are behaving trustworthily, and then we deal with the extreme minority some other way. So that's the book. It took me about 10 months to write, which if you know, the colleagues here at Berkman think that's extraordinarily fast. To me, that's regular. I like writing, and it's what I do on airplanes when there's no internet, so works out pretty well. And I'm actually real pleased with it. I think it's I'm really happy with the argument. I think I lay it out well. I think it's a beautiful object. I'm really impressed with the color and the way the physical thing looks, and that's kind of neat because I often can't say that about books. So my guess is the NSA is not really into controlling population. I mean, certainly the Chinese government is not spying on its citizens to catch terrorists. It's spying on its citizens for social control, and that's obvious, and we know that. You know, my belief is that the FBI and the NSA, I mean, they're making actually good faith efforts to catch the bad guys. I'm not into the conspiracy. It doesn't mean things change, doesn't mean it's a good idea. I mean, I don't think it's a fair. I make the argument that it's not really an effective terrorism catching tool. But I do not think that the US government is trying to do social control. I mean, that seems implausible. And plus, you know, we're pretty controlled even without that. I'm not convinced it's going to help. Right? I mean, you know, some weird colored dress appears on the internet and suddenly we're all forgetting everything that's important. It's hard to tell. This is called thin thread. And it's hard to know the details of exactly what it could do and what the NSA's objections were. There's a lot of rhetoric on both sides. Actually, there's rhetoric on Binny's side and silence on the other side. So I don't know if I can comment intelligently about that.
I just have a quick question about sort of what happens when our data is secure within our technology. Because definitely there will come a time when sort of governments need to sort of work against a bad guy's technology to figure out what they know. But how do we stop that from, how would you think that would stop from snowballing into the type of situation where we have now, where they learn more and more information about how to sort of get other people's data?
So it's very hard. I mean, this is a classic snowball effect, that data, when you have data, you want more data. And if your mindset is to collect it all, then you start collecting it all. And it's very hard to stop.
But then does it become a problem of philosophy and not policy?
I think, yeah, man, and you know, philosophy, policy distinction feels, you know, certainly murky and maybe arbitrary. But yes, there is a philosophy here that translates into policies. And in the book, I spent a lot of time actually on the philosophy. I have a chapter called Principles, where I try to give some principles of how we should make these decisions about how we treat data in the 21st century. I mean, I firmly believe that this is the pollution problem of the information age. I mean, you know, data, all processes produce it. It stays around, festering. We're arguing about secondary uses and disposal and how to deal with it. And I really believe that just like we here, you know, are amazed at our forebears in the 100 years ago who ignored pollution as they built the industrial age, we're going to be judged by our grandchildren on how we deal with data in these early years of the information age. I think the analogy is pretty strong. So yeah, I mean, the philosophy, I believe, is really important because that informs everything else. Right. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the book about corporate surveillance and why it's being done. You know, it's being done for manipulation. Right? It's advertising. It's psychological manipulation. It's getting you to buy things you might not want to, like that book, which makes a great gift in case you didn't know. Right? But if I know exactly the moment you are most susceptible to my reasonable presentation of that book, you know, I now can optimize my pitch or optimize it to your framing. Now, there's a level of what's okay and what's not, and we get to decide. Right now, everything is okay. You know, in the last election, presidential election, candidates would target ads to individuals. If this was your hot button issue, you got that message. If that was your hot button issue, you got that message. Completely different. Now, that's been done in the past, but at a much coarser level. Right? Depending on the TV show you're watching, you'd see different ads because of who the advertisers thought you were. But now we can do that almost perfectly, down to the individual level. And not just internet advertising or email. Right? The cable companies are working on delivering personalized video ads in your television stream. So what's okay and what's not okay? Right? I mean, does this push us to conformity? Are we really making a free decision to buy that book if I know exactly how to manipulate you to convince you that you need it? Now, on the one hand, you are making the choice. On the other hand, this is way stacked against you. You don't stand a chance. And where does this cross the line? How much of this data matters? There's an interesting experiment done. Facebook did this. If Facebook showed a little sticker that said "I voted" on your page, your friends are more likely to vote. They did an experiment where they did some and didn't do others, and then tested it. So that sticker on your Facebook page makes your friends more likely to vote. Now, Facebook did not do this. I'm not saying they want to, but they could. What if they only showed that sticker on the pages of people who voted in the way that Facebook wanted them to? Then they're going to inflate the number of votes for their candidate. Now, that's creepy as hell, but actually not illegal. Should it be? I don't know. And these are decisions we have to make. Another experiment, really neat experiment. It turns out that if an advertisement is accompanied by a picture of someone who looks like you, you are more susceptible to the advertisement. Right? And this is the way it is. You're more susceptible to advertising when presented by people who look like you. So the experimenters did is they took a picture of the subject and another picture, morphed them together to make a new face that looked like the subject but was unrecognizable to the subject, and found that the subject was more susceptible to the advertising. As far as we know, no advertiser on the net does this yet, but it's certainly possible, right, given the tagged photos on Facebook and the technology to deliver individual advertisements. Is that legal? Yes, but is it moral? Maybe. Fundamentally you can't, because metadata is generated by the things you do. So you can not use Google search. Right? There's a search engine called DuckDuckGo that doesn't collect metadata. I use it a lot. Honestly, it's not as good as Google. Right? You could turn your cell phone off. I spend all day turning on and off my location tracking on my cell phone. This is my little thing I do. I guarantee you, it's annoying. I don't recommend it. But, that means whenever I want to use an Uber, I have to turn it on and then turn it off when I'm done. And now I forgot. Now I can't use the app. And now my Maps isn't working. And so the things you do are around the edges. And you could pay for your book in cash. Right? That limits it, but now you got to carry cash. So there are things you can do to sort of limit the amount of data you're producing. But they're all annoying. What I argue is the drivers of surveillance are fear and convenience. This is the convenience part. It is really convenient to use these computers and systems that collect our data. But that's why Facebook's making so much money. So we're good at it. We can destroy data. We know how to do it. The question is, are we willing to? And there's a lot of belief that data has value. And this is Moore's law. Right? As data becomes cheaper to store, the marginal utility of storing it drops down. So data that you used to throw away 10 years ago because you couldn't save it, it was too expensive, it wasn't worth it, now you can. Because data storage is so cheap, you might as well save it, you might need it later. And I remember when I first was in the first decade of email, I had hundreds of email boxes and I used to sort my email very carefully, one box for each person. I spent a lot of time doing this so I could find stuff. In 2006, I stopped doing that. Before 2006, I had hundreds of email boxes. After 2006, I had one. Because for me, for email in 2006, search became cheaper than sort. Right? It was easier to save everything and search it than sort it all and figure out what to save. Right? That line has been crossed for a lot of our data. Just save everything. Right? Don't even think about it. Hard drives are cheap. Who cares? Right? That's what's happened. So while you can destroy data, and we know how to do it, people don't want to. Although my hope is that now that we're seeing these big data breaches, like Anthem, like Sony, insurers will go to companies and say, what do you mean you have all that data? Are you guys crazy? Think of that enormous liability. You should delete it. And that'll be the first pushback against collect everything that we've seen. Anything else is going to have to be legislation. right? Data must be destroyed after 2 years. You can't reuse it. You know, well, whatever we decide. Yeah, I do discuss the right to be forgotten. It's actually a very complicated question. That people don't know the story, this is a European legislation that requires basically search engines to delete certain things. And the real problem is that we are defined by the first page of our Google hits. That for sort of every person out there, if you type your name into Google, the first 10 things that appear on the first page, that's it. That's your resume. The second page might as well not exist. And there are instances where people are defined by something that happened in their past, which you know, may be legally expunged, but Google still has it as the first hit. I mean, that poor woman's dress. I mean, that's her life, period. Doesn't matter what she does from now. She can be president. There'll still be that dress. And what the European court said is that, you know, Google as a company has a responsibility, you know, and in some circumstances, not to show some search results because they are not reflective of the person. And you know, this is a very complicated issue. I'm not convinced that. I mean, I think the general philosophy makes sense. I'm not sure the ruling makes sense, but it is something we need to talk about. That are we to be forever defined by, you know, the thing that got the most views on Instagram that we did? Or can we, as a person, move beyond that? And how do we do that? So yeah, I do talk about it. It's an interesting question. I think one we're going to be revisiting over the years as we figure this out. Companies, you know, I like the fact that, you know, what I call the public-private surveillance partnership, we're seeing fraying. We're seeing companies sue the government. We're seeing, you know, the two fighting and less working in sync. And I mean, companies aren't doing this for altruistic reasons, doing it for PR reasons. You know, we are cheered when a company like Microsoft is fighting the FBI about turning over data of an individual on a server in Ireland, right? So, and Microsoft is doing that for the PR value, but it's still a good thing. So certainly, I mean, there's a whole lot of corporate security that companies should do. And I don't really go into that. I mean, I'm much more the individual, but I do like the legal battles. I mean, in a sense, we have an economic problem. We have an externality issue. Right? We want companies to protect our data, and when companies lose our data, we're the ones who suffer. So the entity who has the capability to fix the problem doesn't really have the incentive. Right? And this is what market failures look like, and this is one of the reasons I think we need governments to step in. And our predictive powers are really lousy. And we tend to be really good at predicting near advances in technology. We're terrible at two things. We're terrible at far advances in technology, and we're terrible at social changes due to advances in technology. I mean, everyone predicted you're going to sell things on the internet. Nobody predicted eBay. Right? The normalization of the world's attics. You know that. So I don't think we can predict a lot of these things. I really think, and that makes it hard because now technology is moving so fast. The speed of technology, I think one of the issues we have to deal with, especially in something like surveillance, but other things too, the speed of technology has now exceeded the speed of legislation. Right? When technology moves slowly, laws can keep up and regulate and not regulate and do their work. But as the pace of technology increases, it rapidly outpaces law. I think this is what happened with the NSA. The NSA is very fond of saying, we follow the law, which they do. But the law was not written for today. It was written for 10 years ago. And by following the 10-year-old law, they're doing a lot more than they would back then. So, you know, we're out of sync. You know, I mean, I believe the NSA follows the law as they see it. They are doing their best to hack the law. They're doing their best to exploit every single loophole in the law. But no one's sitting and say, you know, we're going to break this law now. They're going to say, we figured out how to get around this law now, which might be the same thing in some respects, but I think it's different in important respects. All right, you're going to be my last question.
How are law schools handling this?
I'm sorry?
How are law schools handling
I do not know, which is odd because I'm actually sort of affiliated with a law school. I mean, law school is certainly teaching these things. And there are, lots of legal scholars who are writing about these issues, who have been, throughout the decades. So I don't think the problem is legal theory. I think the problem is practice.
I think NSA should have paid more attention to the intent of the law, not just.
But this is an interesting general question. I mean, I do think that the intent of the law matters. That if you can say, and this is what the NSA did. I mean, look, here's how we can use these 4 words in the law to do exactly what the law doesn't want us to do. But look, right? I mean, it says it right here. We can do it. Now, to me, that's cheating. Right? You're not allowed to do that. But in legal theory, that's okay. I mean, this is tax loopholes. This is all of those things where you follow the letter but violate the spirit. I think it's even worse that the laws were crafted in a way that would deliberately obscured what they could do and then sold to Congress, I think, under false pretense. So yeah, I think this is all not okay. But this is the world we live in now. And it's hard to imagine another one. You have to get up to a point where judges really look at intent. So maybe that's possible. This is a very pessimistic talk. I'll end by saying that while I am short-term pessimistic, I am long-term optimistic. I actually believe we will solve this. I don't believe this is the end of the great American experiment, that we're going to live in a police state from now on. I actually think we'll figure this out. I think it'll take a generation or 2. I think this will be like the pollution problem. And it will take a generation of people born into the problem to come up with a solution. But I do think we will solve this.
Wait a minute, we haven't solved the pollution problem.
I think it's not, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, our rivers don't catch on fire anymore. We've made progress. We made a lot of progress. We made a huge amount of progress. I mean, we can look at the the new environmental problems, which is global warming, but the old ones, unleaded gas did an enormous amount of good. I mean, we have made great strides. So, but that shows that we might be fighting this for the next 80 years, which will, be sad, but maybe it's inevitable. We humans tend to be cyclical.
How can you say that when we've been under a nuclear risk for as long as we have?
Because we're still under nuclear risk and we're okay. That's how.
We're okay.
I haven't been hit by a nuclear bomb in at least 2 years. Even under extreme risks, we seem to manage. I mean, you look at this through the Cold War, and it was pretty hairy for a while, but it worked. I mean, even something like the Cuban Missile Crisis, actually sane people prevailed. It was kind of neat and a little bit surprising, but heartening. So with that, I thank you all.